They say silk is soft, delicate, beautiful. But in ancient China it became something far more terrifying, something deadly. Imagine being wrapped tightly in layers of fine silk, wet and heavy, not as a sign of honor, but as a slow, silent execution. In 705 AD, a noblewoman named Lady Wang cried out in horror as palace guards tied her in soaking silk, her body shaking from fear. What followed was so cruel, so haunting, that generations of scholars tried to erase it from the records. But they failed. This wasn't just torture. It was a weapon created for one very specific group, high-born women. You're about to discover why these respected ladies would rather take a sword to the heart than be wrapped in silk. You'll learn how this nightmare wasn't just about pain, but about shame, power, and identity. Why was it only used on noblewomen? What twisted thinking made it more terrifying than death itself? And how did one cunning empress use it to crush her enemies while keeping her hands clean? This story has been buried for over 1,000 years, but today we bring it to light. And trust me, you won't look at silk the same way again. The Tang Dynasty was China's golden age. It was a time of great beauty, rich trade, and thriving art. The Silk Road filled the empire with wealth. Poets were honored like kings. For the first time in history, women could hold real power in court. On the surface, everything looked perfect. But what your textbooks don't tell you is that behind all that beauty, something horrifying was happening. The very silk that made noblewomen graceful and admired was secretly being used to punish them in the cruelest way. Back then, a woman's honor meant everything. In Confucian society, her purity and reputation were her family's pride. For noblewomen especially, their image mattered more than life itself. They wore the finest robes. Their words could influence the emperor. They were respected by thousands, but that status came with a terrible risk. Because if you ever stepped out of line, the same silk that wrapped your body in luxury could become the fabric that ended your life. And it wasn't just about dying. It was about losing everything that made you who you were. Imagine being stripped bare, your dignity taken, your pride twisted into humiliation. The method used was so well planned, so specific, it destroyed not only the body, but also the soul. When a noblewoman was sentenced to this punishment, the first step was stripping her completely naked. That alone was enough to destroy her emotionally. In ancient China, an upper-class woman's body was meant to be seen only by her husband. To be exposed in front of guards and onlookers was a deep violation, like being torn apart without a single wound. But that was only the beginning. Next came the silk. Not the dry, light fabric you're picturing. This silk was drenched in water. Wet, heavy, cold. The executioners would slowly start wrapping it around the woman, starting at her toes, moving up her legs, across her chest, and finally to her neck. Layer after layer, smooth and soft, but full of dread. This wasn't just fabric anymore. It was her death sentence. The same silk she once wore proudly, embroidered and perfumed, shown off at royal banquets, was now turning into her trap. And here's where things got truly terrifying. Silk, when wet, is soft and flexible. But as it dries, it tightens. Slowly, relentlessly, like a living thing wrapping tighter and tighter around her flesh. There was no blood, no screams of tearing skin, just silence. A quiet suffocation, measured in inches and hours. Court records found in ancient Buddhist monasteries say the victims stayed awake through most of it. Fully conscious, they felt their fingers go cold first, then numb, then came their hands and arms. Every part of the body lost feeling, one section at a time, as the silk pressed tighter. It wasn't fast. It was a slow, terrifying wait for the end, and it played with the mind as much as it crushed the body. Think about lying there, fully aware, helpless, watching the very symbol of your class, your power, your elegance, slowly turn into the thing that kills you. That wasn't an accident. That was the point. This execution wasn't about justice. It was about humiliation. It was designed to rip away every shred of dignity. In one monastery record, a woman begged through her tears, "Please use the sword. Let me die with honor." But the guards refused. That's because this punishment was reserved only for women of status. And as you'll soon see, there were 3 versions of this silk torture, each one more terrifying than the last. Now here's the part that most people don't know. This method of execution wasn't really about death, not at first. It was about something far darker. This was psychological warfare. It was meant to erase a person's identity before their life. You see, noblewomen in ancient China weren't just rich. They stood for everything society believed was graceful, pure, and ideal. Confucian values taught that these women represented the highest standards of virtue. Their behavior, their dress, even the way they spoke, all of it shaped how others saw morality itself. So when the government, or more often someone in power, wanted to destroy a woman completely, they couldn't just kill her. That would make her a martyr. They had to ruin her image, her honor, and her legacy. That's where the silk came in. Think about it. Every day of her life, a noblewoman was surrounded by silk. She wore it, slept under it, decorated her home with it. Silk meant beauty, safety, wealth, everything a woman like her cherished. So turning that silk into a tool of death was more than cruel. It was brilliant in its cruelty. It took the most comforting, familiar thing she knew and twisted it into her greatest fear. Other forms of execution, beheading, hanging, even being cut into pieces, were violent, yes, but quick. Families could still honor the dead. Their memories stayed respected, but not with silk torture. That was different. It tore apart the victim's soul long before the body stopped breathing. The woman died in shame, naked, alone, and slowly crushed by something that used to be part of her identity. Her pride, her elegance, her entire place in society, all stripped away with each tightening thread. This wasn't just a death sentence. It was erasure, and it wasn't done in secret. Often, other women from the court were made to watch. That's right. Witnesses were required to be there, especially other high-ranking ladies. They had to see what would happen if they dared step out of line, if they ever thought their status could protect them. The silk cocoon was there to remind them, your beauty, your grace, your wealth, it means nothing if the throne turns against you. And one empress, perhaps the most feared woman in Chinese history, didn't just use this punishment. She mastered it. Her name was Empress Wu Zetian, China's first and only female emperor. She ruled with intelligence, charm, and terrifying precision. And when it came to eliminating her enemies, especially women who threatened her power, she didn't need armies or assassins. She had silk. Wu knew she couldn't appear weak or jealous. If she ordered a simple execution for another woman in court, it might look like she was scared, like she saw them as competition. That wouldn't work for an emperor trying to prove she was just as strong as any man. So instead, she used silk torture as the perfect cover. With this method, she could accuse her rivals of moral corruption, a vague but damning charge in Confucian society. Whether it was adultery, gossip, or stepping outside traditional roles, she could spin the story however she liked. And then she'd order the silk cocoon. The punishment wasn't just deadly, it was humiliating. The message was loud and clear. No matter how beautiful, respected, or well-dressed you were never safe from Wu's reach. She didn't need to use it often. Just once in a while. That was enough. The fear spread faster than any army. Noblewomen across the empire began to live in quiet terror. Every time they put on their silk robes, they couldn't help but wonder, could this same fabric one day be used to kill me? The most famous case of Wu's cruelty came in the year 695. Her stepson, Crown Prince Li Xian, had a wife named Lady Kang. She was loyal, smart, and gaining favor in court. She wasn't leading a rebellion. She wasn't plotting anything. But her growing popularity made Wu nervous. She couldn't risk another powerful woman taking the spotlight. So Wu had her arrested under false charges of disloyalty. And instead of a quick death, she gave the order for the silk cocoon. Court records say Lady Kang's final words were heartbreaking. "Your Majesty," she whispered, "I served the royal family with honor. Must I really die wrapped in shame?" Wu's reply was cold. "The silk reveals your truth. Beautiful on the outside, dangerous when tied to power. Lady Kang took 14 hours to die. And during the first 4 hours, every noblewoman in court was forced to watch, and the Empress wasn't finished, because she didn't just use silk to punish. She used it to control. After Lady Kang's death, the court changed. The atmosphere grew heavier. Conversations became shorter, more careful. Smiles were forced, eyes looked away. Because everyone knew Wu wasn't using silk torture just for punishment anymore. She was using it to shape her court, to bend everyone's mind. The fear of the silk was stronger than laws, stronger than soldiers, stronger than loyalty itself. According to the ancient Tang records, Wu began to use this method as a form of mental training, not just for her enemies, but for those closest to her. She didn't need to kill many people. One death, witnessed by 100 noblewomen, was enough to make them obedient. The idea was simple. If you step out of line, even a little, your fate will be slow, shameful, and seen by all. But her most terrifying act didn't come from punishing a political rival. It came from what she did to someone inside her own family, her own daughter-in-law. The story goes that this woman, respected and admired by many, had done nothing wrong. She simply had influence. She spoke wisely, advised her husband well, and others in court began to respect her voice. And that was enough to place a target on her back. Wu accused her of arrogance. That was the official reason. Arrogance. No real evidence, no conspiracy. Just a feeling that this woman was growing too visible, too respected. And with that, the Silk Order was given again. People begged Wu to reconsider. Even those loyal to her warned that this could cause unrest. But Wu didn't flinch. Because for her, this wasn't just about removing a woman. It was about reminding every single person in the palace that love, blood, and innocence meant nothing in the face of her rule. And so once again silk was soaked, layered, and wrapped. And once again a noble woman was erased, not just from life, but from memory, dignity, and legacy. But it wasn't just the slow death that made this method so feared. It was what happened inside the mind of the victim. And that's where this torture turned into something darker than most could even imagine. This is where silk torture crossed the line from cruelty into something far more chilling, because it didn't just kill the body, it shattered the mind. Traditional torture aimed to force out confessions or punish crimes. But silk torture? It was built to destroy the soul while keeping the victim completely aware. Silk, as soft as it seems, has one horrifying trait. When it dries, it shrinks. Slowly, quietly, it doesn't crush all at once. It tightens like a noose made of fabric, inch by inch, breath by breath. And the worst part? The victim could feel every thread as it pulled tighter. Court documents from Buddhist monasteries describe the process taking anywhere from 6 to 18 hours. And during that time, the woman inside the silk was fully conscious. No sleep, no escape. Just the slow realization that her body was shutting down one part at a time. First the fingers, then the hands, then the chest. Her lungs would press tight, her heartbeat would race, and her mind, trapped in terror, would begin to collapse long before her body did. One ancient account told of a noblewoman who cried out, "I feel the 73rd thread pressing into my wrist. When the 100th tightens, I'll lose my hands." Imagine that. Knowing exactly how your death is coming minute by minute. No mystery, no relief, just a countdown. And sometimes the silk would tighten faster or slower, depending on the room's temperature or humidity. That made it even worse, because the victim never knew if the next moment would bring more pain or a moment of stillness. Hope and panic would rise and fall in waves, and then there was the final cruelty, the color of the silk. Always pure white, in Chinese culture white was the color of innocence, of virtue. It symbolized everything these women were supposed to be. And so, as they died, they were wrapped in the very thing they were meant to represent. They looked peaceful from the outside, but inside they were being crushed by the slow betrayal of their own identity. Over and over again, witnesses reported that victims didn't scream for help. They begged for the sword, for fire, for anything faster, anything more human. They said things like, "Let me die like a warrior, not like an insect trapped in a web." And once you understand that, you realize this wasn't just an execution. It was psychological dissection. It tore away everything they believed about who they were, until even death was seen as a release. By the end of the Tang Dynasty, the silk torture had become a shadow that loomed over every noble household. Its power didn't just lie in the deaths it caused, it was in the fear it left behind. That fear sat at royal banquets, it walked through palace gardens, it whispered behind closed doors. Every woman of status knew the very fabric that made her feel proud could one day be used to destroy her. And then something strange happened. When the Tang Dynasty collapsed in 907 AD, the silk torture quietly disappeared. Not just banned, but erased. The dynasties that followed didn't want anything to do with it. And it wasn't because they suddenly became merciful. No, ancient China still had brutal punishments, beatings, flayings, executions of all kinds. But this one was different. It left behind something worse than broken bodies. It left broken minds. Witnesses would report nightmares. Servants who saw it happen would later refuse to speak. It created trauma so deep that even generations later, families avoided talking about it. Buddhism was also growing at this time, and its teachings didn't sit well with the nature of silk torture. Buddhism spoke of suffering with purpose, learning through pain, or purifying the soul through trials. But this torture had no higher goal. It didn't lead to repentance. It didn't seek truth. It only wanted to humiliate and destroy, and so slowly it vanished from official records. For centuries, historians debated whether it had really existed. Some said it was just legend. Others claimed it had been exaggerated. But then, in the 1970s, everything changed. Monastery archives were uncovered, deep in the mountains, hidden scrolls, preserved letters, first-hand witness accounts that described the silk torture in heartbreaking detail. And suddenly, the truth could no longer be denied. It had happened. It was real. And its silence had been part of its cruelty. Now, when we look back, we see the silk not just as a symbol of beauty, but as a tool used to control women through fear, to turn their elegance against them. It was a perfect reflection of how power could twist anything, even something soft and graceful, into a weapon. But we're not done yet. Because what comes next shows how this ancient nightmare still echoes in the world today. So now you know. The silk torture wasn't just an ancient execution. It was a carefully designed method to strip away dignity, silence influence, and erase identity, layer by layer. But the most disturbing truth? That same method, that same twisted psychology didn't die with the Tang Dynasty. It simply changed form. Because while we may no longer see women wrapped in wet silk and left to suffocate, the idea behind it, of turning someone's strength into their downfall, is still very much alive. That's what makes silk torture so unforgettable. It used something beautiful, something tied to pride, femininity, and power, and turned it into a personal prison. And that concept hasn't gone away. Look around today. The way people are shamed online, using their own words, or careers destroyed by the very image they built. The tactics may be modern, but the idea is the same. Turn pride into punishment. Make someone fear the very thing that once gave them value. That's what the silk cocoon really was. A slow erasure, wrapped in elegance. And now, every time you touch silk, or see it on a dress, or imagine its softness, you'll know there's a darker story stitched into those threads. A story of noblewomen who died not because they were weak, but because they were powerful. And someone in control decided to twist their identity into their end. So here's the real question. How many other brutal truths have been hidden behind the soft face of history? What other elegant traditions are just silent warnings, buried in time? If this story opened your eyes, don't forget it, because history doesn't just teach us what happened, it shows us what can happen again.